Now we are going to listen the presentation of Rob Reilly. Rob is the president of the Education Society of IEEE. Rob received a doctoral degree and bachelor degree from the University of Massachusetts and Amherst, as well as master's degree from Springfield College. He has been computer science teacher at various institutions for over 25 years. Highlights of his career include serving in the Office of Information Technologies at the University of Massachusetts. He has been researcher at the Institute of Intelligent Systems at the University of Memphis, Tennessee, and as a researcher in the Media Lab at the MIT. Dr. Reilly's work challenges currently accepted learning pedagogy for delivering knowledge from a model-based domain. Currently, as I said before, he's the IEEE Education Society president. So I remember that Rob is very close to us. In the last years, we are collaborating, he has been supporting all the activities of the Spanish chapter. I remember that 3 years ago, we made a nice presentation in the same room about Pablo Picasso. I have here the title. Pablo Picasso was not just another artist. And you were talking about the box and what kind of things can be outside of the box and inside. And it was very nice. I meet with other colleagues that remember that presentation. So it's an honor that you have with us, Rob. Thank you, and as you want.
Well, it's nice to see you all again. I'm glad to be here. I rode the subway, the metro yesterday and saw many places and walked, and maybe tomorrow afternoon after the CSEV conference. Thank you for coming. This is the neatest picture. I tried to use this on all the presentations I have. There was a fellow in France who made a presentation and this was in it. And I asked him for his presentation. I said, very good presentation, it's an excellent presentation. It wasn't in my field, it was a good presentation, but I was in this area and he was here. I just wanted the picture. But I didn't want to say, no, I just want the picture, can you send? So it was excellent. So there's, this kind of depicts my position on education, that sometimes we just crank books and hope that the students learn. But before we start, there's a quiz. Is that good Spanish? ¿Cómo se llama for the rest of it? Ah. Okay, what's the answer? Bilingual. Luis. Guy from Barcelona. Luis from Barcelona. Okay. Okay, we're going back to Luis from Barcelona. What's the answer here, Luis?
Bilingüe.
Yeah, good. My computer isn't working well, and I have a... Okay, anybody? Yeah? Okay, here's the hard one. Whoops. Here's the hard one.
American,
yeah. Yeah, USA, American. Luis, good. Okay. This is the title of it. I'm not an engineer. I have a doctoral degree in education, which is pedagogy. And here's something that Albert Einstein said. He did a lot of things that were interesting. It is, in fact, nothing short of a miracle that modern methods of instruction have not yet entirely strangled inquiry. And sometimes, I know at the MIT Media Lab, the courses many times get in the way of the students learning something because they want to go out and do research and explore and develop an important word, curiosity. Curiosity seems to be something where good education happens where students are curious, and how to make students curious seems to be the trademark of good education programs, of good professors. And here's another thought before we get into my two main points. Integrating the delivery of knowledge with emerging technologies. That's what we seem to be talking about a lot. Integrating what delivery of knowledge. And let me try to focus you on delivery of knowledge. We're not so much talking about the emerging technologies, even though they seem to be really important. But if I could draw your focus back to the delivery of knowledge and not so much on the emerging technologies. And here's a meta thought. Boy, I'm going to do more walking tonight from here back. Okay. I have a really good picture I took in Guatemala. They have a wheel, and I think it's the first wheel ever, or it's the second wheel, but it was the first time somebody reinvented the wheel. It's one of those two. It's a really old wheel, and I took a picture of it with me next to it, but it wasn't my camera. So here's a wheel. Let's think for a moment. Let's think for a moment about the function of a wheel, because I hope I'm going to make a point. The function of a wheel. What does a wheel do? In regard to a vehicle, a wheel, huh?
We have just a meeting and we need to talk to the microphone, sorry.
Oh.
Because we are transmitting and no people outside, we don't hear it.
Okay.
You are recording, you need to be...
This-
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I was going to be dead if I had to sit and couldn't move around. Okay, so the wheel. Think for a moment of the function of a wheel in regard to a vehicle, any vehicle. It makes it move, right? This is pretty easy, but I hope to make a big point. The function of a wheel, since the first wheel, hasn't changed. The function of a wheel to drive cars and land movers and bicycles and everything else. The function of the wheel is the same. And when people think about the wheel on their vehicle, or a new vehicle or a new technology, the thought is not so much about the function of a wheel or how to make the wheel better. They're interested in a lot of other things. But in educational technology, the function of the wheel is important but unchanged. The technology has evolved, but not primarily it's not primarily part of the vehicle development. Educational technology, though, seems to be the other way around. It seems that we're not so much concerned with the educational technology as much as we are of the iPad or the computer or wireless or how we deliver education. But primary reason, I think, should be how do we deliver education? What's the function of pedagogy, not what's the function of the technology? And it seems that the technology in many cases drives education. But basically, this is what's supposed to happen. It doesn't matter if it's this contraption that you crank or an iPad or wireless something, or just in the next 10 years maybe being able to transmit brain waves. Transmit brain waves. I will be able to, just like when you go into a hospital, you have a machine that they put you in and they can see brain activity. Well, they can see it, they can measure it and see it, but you can transmit it. If you can see it, you can, well, I'm going to transmit it there. It's going to be part of your wireless network. Something you put a hat on and it'll transmit what you're thinking. Oh my. hold this meta thought for a moment. What are the emerging learning technologies? Just think of those things. Cloud computing, you know, no more paper, no more not pencil, but the emerging technologies. And how can we use them effectively and efficiently? And here's a term, deliver knowledge. I'd like you to think about deliver knowledge, two things. Deliver knowledge, the function of a wheel in relation to technology. How we deliver knowledge. So what's this new piece of technology do? Well, it does the same thing we were trying to do 300 years ago. Different kinds of knowledge, but delivery method kind of the same. How do we accommodate emerging practices associated with new learning technologies and our current learning pedagogy? Well, pedagogy we don't have such a good deal with. I know in the United States we don't really do pedagogy. Teachers in lower grades, K-12, they have maybe one course in how the brain works. But that's what we're trying to deal with. How to make the brain do something, receive this knowledge. Doink. Okay, now let me start to pull this together, I hope. So I think there's 6 categories of emerging technologies. And there's, of course, 3 right here. Cloud computing, mobile technology, they kind of do the same thing. Their function is the same. Think about it as a wheel. They're how you get there. They're the vehicle. They share or deliver knowledge. Gaming, it's there, but I haven't quite figured that one out yet, how it's related. But it seems important. I just can't get my brain around how. The other 3 seem to be not so much about the technology. And these 6 seem to be the ones that are listed in many places. The open content, MIT is doing that. The Open University in the UK, I think, is doing that. And everybody can share knowledge. And there's that word again, knowledge, delivering knowledge. But how do we measure what we learn? And I hope to start talking about that in a moment. The emerging technologies that are beginning to appear on lists of emerging technologies are beginning to talk about people. How do people receive the knowledge? Not so much cloud computing or the other few that you've seen on lists, but how do people, what are they going to do with it? What happens at the other end? We throw out knowledge and different ways of doing it, different vehicles, but now the focus seems to be on when people receive it, you know, how do we know they receive it properly? How do we know they receive knowledge they get it? They understand what you're really teaching them as opposed to they think they get it, but they really don't. So personal computing environments, adapting learning environments, not just technology, but the pedagogy of personal learning environments. What is it someone's trying to learn? What is it you're trying to teach them, and how do you know they learn what you're teaching? So one thing I think that's coming when this shift comes along to an importance on pedagogy is folks are going to ask, well, and state governments, they do this all the time, is how effective is our method, and how do you know? How are you going to measure it? There's a new field developing called learning analytics, which looks into when you do testing that's not standardized testing anymore, when it's individualized, how do you know and how do you not spend 100 times more time doing this analysis of these people? Certainly standardized testing is much easier. It's much easier. How do you deal with 100 individuals where you have to deal with each one? Well, some of the good programs are seeing that it doesn't really change where you had standardized testing. If you give someone an individualized learning session, everybody's kind of doing the same thing. They just approach it differently. They're going to ask the same questions. A good one that I saw, when I did, was everyone in the class, their assignment was, what happens if Nikola Tesla's dream really happened? You know, you could broadcast high voltage electricity. What would happen if you could do that? That seemed like a problem that you'd have 100 different answers for. But interestingly enough, everybody had kind of the same questions. What would happen if Nikola Tesla's broadcast high voltage electricity? Well, Saudi Arabia would instantly be a poor country. How would that change the world? Because we could broadcast electricity to cars. We wouldn't need petroleum. And what were the other social implications of being able to do that? And they thought about that and came up with a lot of good answers. There was also the answer of, and mostly everybody said, well, we can't even do that. We can't even start to do that. Well, when that came up in class, my answer was, well, what's radio? You know, radio in a car is, well, really low voltage electricity. It's broadcast. What do you have to do high voltage electricity without killing people or blowing up the car when it gets there? So there was a thought process. The point is that these individual learning tasks, the ability to do deep reasoning and think about the theory that underlies a given topic, isn't harder than a standardized test, really, except the students have something to do. The students are working. They're developing curiosity. They're into learning about learning. They're into learning about how something works, which is important. And I think the U.S. will do Teslas. I think the U.S. students, U.S. too, I think we'll figure out how to broadcast high voltage electricity, and God, we'll turn it into a weapon, and we won't do anything more after that, because we do that in the USA. So, again, the first few were pieces of technology, regardless of who was using them, but the lists are now containing the individual learner, consideration for the individual learner. And we're going to focus on learning analytics, and I put this here because I thought that this presentation could be posted somewhere, and these are some some websites that deal with learning analytics and how to do it, the concept, and where some successful programs are. So I'll go by this in the hopes that it will be somewhere that's accessible to you. Learning, we'll go to this one. I talked about the first paragraph, but instead of standardized testing, what I'm talking about is explicit student actions, completing assignments, taking exams, of course, tacit actions, online interactions, the things that you see them doing, your understanding as a professor, and looking at a student saying, they seem to be on the right track, they're doing the right things, and that Socratic method, the skill that Socrates has, is what I'm trying to advocate for. That storytelling, again, the Socratic method. Okay. Learning analytics promises to harness the power advanced in data mining, interpretation, and modeling to, that. I'm sorry there's so many words here. I tried to cut it way down, but I couldn't, mainly because I'd have a hard time remembering what it said. Doink. This isn't standardized testing. This isn't standardized, should come up and say not, yeah. This isn't standardized testing, it's different. It's different. Certainly it's going to be administered individually, but I don't think it's going to take that much more time than a standardized test, because it's the way you conduct sessions, the way you conduct sessions in class. It doesn't have to be formalized. Doink. What the heck? There we go. So trying to make a little bit more sense of all this, I have two things I want to talk about. One is pedagogy, and the other is leadership, because I think a change in pedagogy will necessitate a shift in learning style to engage the student when you're standing there right in front of them. instead of just giving the lecture in, you know, in my favorite picture with the guy cranking the machine. And the first is a vision of pedagogy. Over the past 10 years and over the previous century, we've had great changes in transportation, medicine, and communication. Just think of all those things that have changed. Think of all those things that have changed in education. Probably not a lot. We've had changes in the technology, but not in, but not in the pedagogy, the how it's delivered to the end user. Walk back, here we go. Okay. Here's my basic premise. Learning technology alone doesn't necessarily advance learning. Well-integrated learning technologies and practices often do. With learning principles, just think of how many courses in educational pedagogy, educational psychology you took, and educators, K-12 teachers who were preparing to be teachers. You might not have prepared yourself to be a teacher. They take one. New technologies may advance learning, even traditional technologies, when implemented with pedagogically sound practices. These can result in significant learnings. And this came out of EDUCAUSE magazine, which particularly struck me. Let's think about the words that are associated with our product. Let's think about the words that are associated with our product. Wisdom, knowledge, intelligence, information. The bottom two are, now let's just talk about the top four. What's the difference between knowledge, wisdom, intelligence, and information? To know that is important because that's what we're delivering to students. Information, okay. Information, I think the way that information is delivered, we would make good game show contestants. If we were TV and we wanted to be able to pick good game show contestants, maybe the current method of delivering education would do that. Students can come up with answers quickly, but may not know the underlying theory, or how to apply the underlying theory, or even change it, do research on it. Intelligence, trying to think of how that's different than the other three, wisdom, knowledge, and information. Intelligence seems to have something to do with being smart. Knowledge seems to be how much information you have, but in a sense of being able to apply it to something. Knowledge, how do you build a bridge? Well, I have all these pieces of information, I'll put them together and that's knowledge. Intelligence, I don't know. We better not build this bridge here for many other reasons, not just the knowledge of how to build it. Wisdom, haven't quite figured that out yet, but I think it has to do with culture and values. So these four, the top four, they seem to be important and we need to know the difference among them and how they work. Let me suggest some things. Let me push the button better. Okay. So, so far, what I think we're talking about is there's technology and there's pedagogy. And right now, I'm talking a lot about pedagogy, and I hope that pedagogy is most important. The technology, where they intersect, is certainly important, but the technology is simply a wheel kind of deal. What's the function of a wheel, and how important is the wheel in people who invented the new airplanes, the Dreamliner, as opposed to a regular 747 or a World War I kind of plane? There may have been some attention paid to what kind of wheel we have, but not a lot, especially from the Dreamliner to maybe a 747. Probably is the same wheel. Maybe improved a bit, but the makers of the Dreamliner probably didn't pay much attention to how good is their wheel. What do we have to do this? The wheel was not the primary focus of attention. I used to call this the delivery of effective education, but I think it's the delivery of effective knowledge. And then applying it would be wisdom, maybe. Some basic questions to serve as a starting point. Think of someone who you saw as a good teacher. What was it about them that made them a good teacher? There was probably something that drew you in, your favorite teacher. Maybe they had a verbal skill about them to deliver knowledge. Maybe they challenged you, but there seems to be something that's in the curiosity realm. You were doing something besides just sitting, listening. You were listening a little bit, but then you went out and did something. Or your brain was active and you thought of something. You thought of something. Let me give you an example of a brain-shifting moment. Fishing. We all know what fishing is. We do that in America. My wife does it, but I didn't realize there's a difference between fishing and catching. She does the fishing part. She doesn't catch anything. So people were fishing. 2 people in the river fishing. Yep. 2 people in the river fishing. So along comes baby in a basket. They take it, put it up on the shore. Then 2 more come, take it, put it up on the shore. Then there's a flow of babies in baskets. They drop their fishing poles, and then one person and another are handing the babies from one to the other, putting them up on shore. And after a short time, one person says, "Oh, I'm done. This is all for me," and starts to walk away, starts to head upstream. The person still back in the water turns around and says, "Where are you going? You're leaving me here alone. You can't just leave me." The person over here turns around and says, "I'm going to..." Brain-shifting moment. Brain-shifting moment. What's the answer? I'm going upstream, and I'm going to stop the person from throwing them in. I'm going to stop the person from throwing them in. The point I tried to make with all this is there's a lecture mode in a listening to lecture mode in your brain, and there's a doing research in your brain. If we were in the middle of a research experiment and we weren't just sitting listening, we probably all thought that through in a couple of minutes and come up with the answer. If we're sitting and listening in lecture mode, it's much harder to shift your thought mechanism to get that answer. So probably a good teacher is someone who shifted your brain around, shifted around inside your brain, doing not the fishing analogy, but somehow got you to think and be curious. So what I'm saying is it's most important, I think, to have some mechanism in class where the students kick the tires, see how this works, and the Nikola Tesla thing where there's no solution at this moment, but hey, one of them might do that. But it starts you thinking, and it puts you in a different part of your brain to think about those sorts of things. How do you learn from a person or an object? How do you learn? I don't have an answer for this, but it's something that seems important. What's occurring when you're watching a teacher or a teaching object? What's your brain doing? And it's one of those things, whatever you're teaching, if it's something that it's rule-based, it's just facts that will not change over 500 years, then just listening to them, student will get it. If it's model-based, if there's a theory under it that they need to understand, delivering that knowledge the same way you deliver facts that are unchangeable, there's a different method to doing that. But too often, people don't, professors, teachers don't have this. Let me move along. Okay. Brain shifting moment. That was I got ahead of myself. That brain shifting moment was the fishing business. My hypothesis, the impact of technology, which is ultimately about education, must be driven by how people process information, knowledge, wisdom, which involves understanding the underlying process, which is how we deliver knowledge. How do you know the person received it? Lecture method doesn't work so effectively, especially in these days where we have to understand many things. The emerging technologies they're going to be what they are: nanotechnology, mobile devices, low Earth orbit satellites, and providing Wi-Fi internet access from those, distance education, cloud computing. That stuff's going to happen. The new technology-based delivery methods will facilitate critical changes in the educational structure, I hope, especially if you're going to learn effectively. And the curriculum will need to drive or be driven by pedagogy and not technology. The whole point in there is focus on the curriculum and what the students need and how do you deliver those sorts of things. I talked about that. We went through there. Okay. Let me just make a point of two things. There's two kinds of domain knowledge. Rule-based, which is merely the delivery of information. If you're learning a language, basic math, there are facts. In English, the letter V is said V. In Spanish, it's B. That won't change. There's not research that somebody will say, I can prove it's not B or V. It has to be the other way around. That somebody decided that long ago, and we all agree that that is an unchangeable tenet of language. Model-based is we have to understand the process, and how do you get students to understand the process? Well, lecture helps a little bit. The lecture method doesn't help much. Curiosity, students becoming interested in what happens if I turn this the other way. Everybody turns it this way. What happens if I turn it this way? The example of Tesla, looking into what happens if Tesla's dream of broadcasting high voltage electricity actually happens. Give the students a model, a theory to work on, and they'll understand the model better. The current method seems to me is all rule-based. In many classes that you've seen, there's data and there's questions and answers about the data, and then some information is developed. And that's pretty much that's as far as it goes. We need to integrate it, do research, test it, give students the ability to do some curious research to come up with knowledge. Here's another model. Let me suggest that this will work better. Regardless of what the technology is, I think this is going to work better. The model for rule-based is the first three blue bubbles, but over on the left-hand side, this is all curiosity. To get here and to get this working, there has to be something in the curriculum that causes the students to be curious about whatever it is you happen to be doing. Over here and up, information, integrating it, developing some insight, just applying it is where we need to go with new technology. The new technologies will be so helpful in doing deeper learning. The way we apply deeper learning and make it meaningful is the students have to understand it, and we're over on this side of the curve. Technology integrated in the curriculum using the internet to enhance learning isn't going to work. Students are going to get bored by it unless you get over into the internet's most powerful facet is the ability for students to be curious and solve problems. The ability to see certain aspects of whatever you're teaching more deeply, to be able to change gravity. What would happen if you could change gravity? What would happen? Understanding that. Okay. And then there's the Socratic method in here. It's storytelling. IEEE one year, their emerging technology was storytelling, developing the Socratic method. I don't know what happened to it because they apparently didn't tell a good enough story to convince people. Okay, the second thing is leadership. No matter what you do, to implement these kinds of changes, I think you need to be more than someone like that big picture I had where the person's just cranking the thing out. You have to be a much more involved educator when you're up in front of the students. Let's think of this. Here's some great leaders. Here's pictures of great leaders. Yeah, here's some pictures of great leaders. Gandhi, de Gaulle. Well, you know them. And next to Socrates and above Picasso is, you know, Manuel, right? But I put that up there and said, oh, but really, you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. Well, you're not, but... but, and I say this to me, except I have someone here, that you're not the smartest guy in the room, but the ability to bring things together and have things happen around him. The ability to bring things together and happen around him, okay? That's what all of these people had as leaders. They all had people in front of them, and they motivated them to do something. Maybe the people in front of them were curious. Well, not so much with Attila the Hun, who was a World War II general named Patton. Boy, I would have liked to have met him for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but he was, well, some of these people couldn't change their skill. What made them an important leader couldn't change. They couldn't interchange it from one to another, but they each identified what they had, Picasso and Mother Teresa, and they applied that to motivate people. And in case of teacher, motivate them and make them curious about something. I think that's what we need to do. And know that the difference between management keeps an organization going. It's accountants. Accountants are good. We don't want accountants to be innovative and bold. We want them to do the job and get things done. There's that aspect to this, the management aspect. But leadership involves getting things started and facilitating change. A little different aspect, leading things along. Whoop. Okay. Here's just a list of the differences between leaders and managers. Certainly teachers have to be good managers, but it's the leadership thing. Focusing on people as opposed to focusing on things. And this, native English speakers, this may be difficult. Even, I have to dwell on it a bit. Doing things right as opposed to doing right things. That's a subtle difference between leaders and managers. And the rest, difference between leaders and managers. Okay. Words of wisdom. Scientists seek to understand what is. The engineers create things that never were. And the problem with engineers is you need to have really creative and bold and innovative people because engineers move things forward. Engineers take the next step. Space flight. Anything you can think of. And it doesn't take too much. It doesn't take too much. Think of the person who invented sliced bread. Sliced bread, that's a really great something that somebody who engineered that, somebody who thought of that, it wasn't a big thought. They saw a slicing machine, and they saw loaves of bread that weren't sliced and said, oh, I could slice bread with this meat slicing machine. And they had sliced bread. The person who invented sliced bread didn't invent the slicing machine and didn't invent bread, but they were an engineer enough. They had a curious mind. They saw something and changed the world. I mean, I know, how much does sliced bread change the world? But it's the idea, it's their thought process that did that. The person who invented sliced bread didn't. Okay. So, why else is this effective? Because I think the 21st century and beyond learner is going to need to know how to, they're not going to be people who can read and write. We need to do that, certainly. But those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn are going to be not in a good situation. And the second part is, I think there's going to be we need to have a shift, regardless of what the technology is. We need to have a shift from model-based knowledge domain as our primary area of interest, our primary focus. The new methods will facilitate critical changes in the educational structure and the curriculum. We need to use the internet and apply it to develop curiosity in students. Doink. That's what I just said. Muchas gracias, saludos. That means the end. Thank you very much. if there are any questions, the answer will be €1. Is there, I don't have a lot of answers. I just think here we are and here we go. Does anyone have any? Yes?
You mentioned that the pedagogues should drive education in the sense of using technology. When you say that, comes to my mind the story of Alan Sokal, you know, this guy from the University of New York, that he cheated a journal of the social science, sending he's a PhD in physics professor in the University of New York in 1996. He sent a paper to a very good journal of social science, but inventing and doing a paper totally absurd, but very complex, so difficult to understand, so dark, that they accepted.
Yeah.
So, do these people have some boundaries like engineers?
No.
Too complex education beyond the limits of something reasonable?
Do they have? I guess the analogy I can think of is there are several websites that say the Holocaust never happened. They said and they present a very compelling case. But I think that one of the problems in the years to come is people are going to be confronted with information and have to know how to decide whether it's real or whether it's not. And the idea of cheating online is made very easy. The Education Society, I'll tell you a short story, the editor-in-chief called me on the phone a few months ago and said, we had someone submit 3 papers. I said, okay, we have lots of people, so why are you calling me? He said, well, the content looked good. I sent it to an associate editor. The associate editor said, oh, this looks like it's in my content area, sent it to at least 3 reviewers. One reviewer called the associate reviewer back, who called the editor-in-chief, who called me, and the reviewer said, that's my paper. That's my paper. So the person took the paper and just changed the name and the university and the email address and sent it in. So I said to the editor-in-chief, I said, well, he submitted 3 papers though, right? He said, yeah, we're looking at the other 2. So that's going to be one of the skills people have to have. And let me say this, I think that there's some Board of Governors of the Education Society here. I think we need to create the IEEE You Can't Be This Stupid Award and give it to this person who not only blatantly copied 100% of the paper, but sent it back to the same journal it appeared in, and it was only 2 or 3 years after it appeared. So most of the editorial board, the Education Society, are the same people who read it, except this associate editor wasn't. It was new. But plus, what are the odds? We have about 400 reviewers that this reads. But the point is that I think that's going to happen a lot, and that's a function of people knowing how to function, being curious and saying, maybe this doesn't work. And I said, with the Nikola Tesla things, knowing what doesn't work and how to recognize things that don't work. The Holocaust sites that say, never happened. In the United States, we have several fringe groups who post things, and they sound reasonable, but oh boy. Kids could believe it, but adults say, no, not going to happen. I don't know. I don't know. I hope people are smart enough when we educate them. And I think this is one of the ways that we make people not just listeners to knowledge, but be able to interpret it. Okay. €1. €1. Well, that was a €2 answer. That was way too long. Anyone else? Otherwise, Edmundo, no, the guy from Barcelona. He'll fall for this. Guy from Barcelona, I'll just talk too fast, he won't catch on, is buying supper for everybody. It's on Luis, right?
Supper.
See, I told you, we'll get it before he...
But I think that €1 is too expensive for me to ask you.
What?
I cannot buy the supper to everyone.
Well, you are. Luis, anything else I hope that I've given you something to think about and something that will make your life better or not. Anyone else? Otherwise, we're done. We're going to eat. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it, and thank you for being IEEE members, or if you're not, then think about being an IEEE member. Thank you.